Jesus Freak here. Thought I'd throw my hat in the ring, as I tend to do in these cases, and talk a little bit about the ending of Mark. This is one of the first translations to be skeptical about the ending of Mark, and actually puts the whole thing in a footnote. RSV. A pity, really. In fact, it caused so much blowback that in 1971, I believe it was, they put it back in the text. Now, it's a majority reading, and it appears in the Vulgate, and well, there's no question that as far as the New Testament was canonized in the 4th century, I think it was about 327, that the longer ending of Mark, as we have it now, was part of it. This regardless of whether Mark wrote it. And what it looks like to me happened is, and this is one of the same theories put about for Deuteronomy, that Mark might have been stopped before he wrote the last bit, and someone else wrote it for him. Mark was basically acting as an amanuensis for Peter. And if you read the Gospel of Mark, you notice it's very much from a Petrine perspective, as if it was written by someone who had been talking to Peter and taking notes. Now, most versions aren't going to be as skeptical about the ending of Mark as the original RSV. They'll probably put it in brackets. They'll probably have a note saying it's not in the oldest and most reliable manuscripts. And you know that the Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus are far from reliable. I did this between 2007 and 2012 and periodically revised it over the years. I've occasionally referenced it in my videos, but I don't refer to it very often because I don't want to cast any aspersions on the King James as a translation to people for whom that might cause a faith-shattering kaboom, and I don't want to destroy anyone's faith when there's nothing to destroy. But for some people, just the existence of translations that sometimes differ, or and even significantly in places, and most of these are minor. I've mentioned the whole thing about the Book of Life versus Tree of Life in Revelation 22. There's some minor differences as in the text that I used to translate from, even though it was more or less the same one the King James translators used. But let's go back to Mark 16. And I'm going to read out of my own translation just to be different. If you follow along with the King James, you know it's not really that different. Now when Jesus arose the day after the Sabbath, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had expelled 7 demons. Now this is mentioned in somewhere in Luke is where it's mentioned. That's Luke 8:2. Just checked. And she left and reported to those who had been with him and were mourning and lamenting. That's corroborated by pretty much everyone. Even John, who tends to read very different from the other Gospels, is in agreement here that Mary Magdalene was the apostle to the apostles. And they, when they heard that he lived and was seen by her, did not believe. They're like, she's just a crazy woman, and what's she talking about? You know, a lot of sexism involved in that. I know there was a specific mention of them. Yeah, Luke 22:11. After these things, he was revealed in another form to 2 of them as they walked going into the countryside. That's Emmaus. That's Luke 24. And they went out and told those who remained. They did not believe them either. Afterward, as the 11 sat at table, he was revealed to them. This is John 20. And reproached them for the disbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen that he had resurrected. And he said to them, "Go into the whole world and proclaim the good news to all creation." This is Mark's version of the Great Commission, where Matthew also mentions them going out into the whole world and bring the message to all nations. Whoever will believe and be baptized will be saved, but whoever shall not believe will be condemned. And these signs will follow those who believe. In my name they will expel demons. And people were doing that in Acts. And one guy tried to do it in his name. And the demons were like, get out of here. You don't know this Jesus guy. And beat him up. They will speak new languages. Acts 2. They will pick up snakes, and if they should drink anything deadly, it will not harm them. Now, you have people who do this. They'll deliberately handle snakes. So they'll drink strychnine and try to prove their immunity because of Mark. And that's one reason people tend to be skeptical about these verses. But that's not actually a problem. You see, when Jesus is quoting in Scripture at the devil, one of the verses he uses is, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." It's like, look, don't prove him. Don't try to prove him. He might just pretend to not be there, just to mess with you if you try that. So, the fact that people who believe still do manage to poison themselves and get bitten by snakes and die, that's not saying that this verse is false. That's saying that it has nothing to do with this verse. Then the Lord, after having spoken to them, was indeed taken up into heaven and sat at the right hand of God. This is again confirmed in Acts. They see him going up, and then Stephen the proto-martyr says as he sees Jesus at God's right hand. And that's what ticks everyone off and gets them to finally pick up rocks at him. And they went forth and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the words by the signs that followed. And really, I think the big gotcha, and the big reason people want to be skeptical about that passage is because of the snake handlers and the hick Pentecostals who drink strychnine to prove that God's with them. Look, don't try to prove God's existence, because they'll screw with you. Don't test the Lord your God. But to me, there's no question that this is Scripture. Just because it's not written in the same style doesn't mean it's not part of the same book. It's a third-party epilogue. You find books nowadays where they'll end suddenly and someone else comes in and writes a little blurb of what happened at the end. This is the kind of thing you might find, say, in Anne Frank. I'd be more correct about it. Anne Frank. Diary of a Young Girl. There might be a blurb at the end saying, and you know what happened, because the author wasn't able to finish. And that's, I think, what this is. Nothing more. Just because it's not written the same way doesn't mean it's not theopneustos. It's not inspired by God. It's why I've said that the people who are trying to tweak the text in significant ways, they don't believe in the authority of Scripture. That's why they feel like they can do this. But I believe in the authority of Scripture. That's why my own translation is so much in accord with the King James. Because I'm translating honestly, and even the textual criticism I did was honest. There is no question in my mind, and shouldn't be in anyone else's mind, about the authority of the last, 11 verses of Mark? Now, some people would point out, Jerome knew about another verse that we don't have. Yes, he did. It's called the Frere Logion. It appears in Codex Washingtonianus. And Jerome actually quoted about half of it in one of his letters. So, he knew it existed. He also knew it wasn't inspired and rejected it. If you're curious as to what it says, you can find it in the New Revised Standard as a footnote. Or here's how I have it rendered. Now, this is just a quotation. Doesn't, and from I wrote the note trying to make it as if it were written in King James English. So here's my note that I wrote on the ending of Mark. At the end of verse 8, I wrote some manuscript said, and they reported all the things that had been commanded them briefly to the companions of Peter. And after this, Jesus himself also sent forth by them from the east, even unto the west, the holy and incorruptible preaching of eternal salvation. And some manuscripts end there or go on with the longer ending. But I don't think that's the original ending. The other note I wrote is at verse 14, and it replaces the phrase, and he said unto them, in verse 15. And here's what... Now, the first half I translated myself, and the second half was another translation, and that I paraphrased a little bit. Now, this is not scripture. This is an edition that appears in a single manuscript. And like I said, Jerome knew about this and rejected it. And they justified themselves, saying, this world of iniquity and unbelief is under Satan, which suffereth not the truth and power of God to be apprehended by the unclean things of the spirits. Therefore make manifest thy righteousness. So spake they now to Christ. And Christ said unto them, the tale of the years of the dominion of Satan is fulfilled, but other terrible things draw nigh. And by reasons of the sin of them I was delivered over unto death, that they may return to the truth and sin no more, that they may inherit the spiritual and incorruptible glory of righteousness which is in heaven. Now, the problem was that is the tale or tally of the years of the dominion of Satan is not fulfilled. And we know that. So it's obvious that that verse is not theopneustos, and that is correctly omitted from our Bibles. Now, I said, I have no doubt of the authenticity of it as we have it. And I don't. What we have is exactly what we're meant to have. Jesus, freak out.